Hello anatomy students. Today we're going to talk about the peripheral nervous system. Now this is the second part of Unit 5. The first part we talked about the central nervous system, but I didn't want to make this a new unit because it is all part of the same nervous system, although it is important for you to recognize that the peripheral nervous system does have different structures and functions from the central nervous system. So let's get started. So this is a schematic that shows us a very brief nervous system overview. So as I said, the nervous system can be broken up into two major portions, the CNS or the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord, and then the PNS or the peripheral nervous system, which lies mostly outside of the CNS. So this is the part that we're going to be talking about here. So the organization of our peripheral nervous system is that our bundles of axons and different sheaths that are going to arrange them are found in nerves. Recall that nerves are the same thing as tracts, which are found in the central nervous system. Each axon is surrounded by an endoneurium, and groups of axons are surrounded by a perineurium. And these groups of axons that are surrounded by a perineurium form nerve fascicles. And then many nerve fascicles are bundled together and enclosed by an epineurium. So all of these neuriums are really just connective tissue sheaths that are organizing these bundles of axons together, making them into nerves. And here's a picture that's showing this. So all the way at the top we have a single axon surrounded by its own myelin sheath. Each axon and myelin sheath is enclosed by the endoneurium. Many of those are bundled together to form a fascicle, which is enclosed by another connective tissue sheath called a perineurium. Many fascicles, so here we have 4 fascicles in our picture. Here we have 1, here's another one for 2, another one is 3, and then 4 down here at the bottom. Many fascicles are bundled together and covered by yet another connective tissue sheath called the epineurium, and together that is going to create what we know as a nerve. So the peripheral nervous system is outside of the central nervous system. It's made up of nerves and ganglia, and these are going to branch out from the brain and the spinal cord, so they are attached to the central nervous system. So we have 43 total nerves, and then they're going to branch out throughout the body, much like the branches of the tree become smaller and smaller twigs as it gets further and further away from the main trunk. And that's exactly what's happening here, our main trunk being our central nervous system. So we have 43 nerves total. The breakdown is here on the slide. And we are going to see nerves extending from the central nervous system out to muscles and glands of the body, but we also have bundles of axons that are going to extend from sensory organs like our eyes and our ears, but even from our skin, that is going to travel to and connect to the central nervous system. So nerves are going to run both ways, so to speak. They're going to bring sensory information into the central nervous system. They're going to carry motor information away from the central nervous system. But then we also have something called ganglia, which are knots of nerve cell bodies which are found outside of the central nervous system. Knots of nerve cell bodies that are found within the central nervous system are called nuclei. But in the peripheral nervous system, we have a different term for them, which is called ganglia. So there are certain nerves that are going to sprout off the base of the brain. They are going to work for both branches of the peripheral nervous system, which basically means that some of these cranial nerves are going to carry sensory information into the central nervous system, and some of them are going to carry motor information away from the central nervous system. Some of them are going to be both. They're going to carry both sensory and motor information. We have 12 different cranial nerves, and they are specialized for various tasks. They are notated by a Roman numeral and by an anatomical name, and they are numbered with these Roman numerals from the anterior aspect to the posterior aspect of the brain. And so here's a picture of the underside of the brain, and our first nerve, cranial nerve number 1, is the olfactory nerve, and it actually is the olfactory bulb, which you saw on the sheep brain. And then they're going to be numbered according to their placement down the midline of the brain itself, and they're numbered from 1 to 12. As I said, some of them carry only sensory or afferent fibers, and some of them carry only motor fibers or efferent fibers, but some of them are going to carry both. As you can see in this diagram, our sensory impulses are designated by these blue lines, and the motor impulses are designated by the red ones. So as you can see, for instance, the olfactory and the optic nerves, nerves 1 and 2, carry only sensory information. But our cranial nerve number 6, for instance, is going to carry motor information. In fact, 3, 4, and 6 here, all of these, they only have red lines. They are only carrying motor information. And then some of them are going to be mixed, like the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is cranial nerve 9, which is carrying both sensory and motor information along their fibers. And so here you can see what I've done is I've taken the name of each cranial nerve in order from 1 to 12, and I just listed the very first letter of its name. And in the column next to it, I indicated whether they are sensory, motor, or both. And I have some mnemonics in order to help you remember the names and the various functions. And the first one, the one that I really like, is O, to touch and feel, very green vegetables, heaven. And there are many more out there that you can look up. This one just kind of sticks with me. And basically, if I were naming cranial nerve 1 through 12, olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, and hypoglossal. And we'll go through these in class as well, but if you just remember this saying, the very first letter of each word corresponds to the very first letter of each cranial nerve name. And in order to remember whether they are sensory, motor, or both, you can remember this saying. So this is going to probably sit well with some baseball fans out there. Sammy Sosa made money, but my brother says Barry Bonds made more. So the S means sensory, the M is for motor, the B is for both. And so, for instance, cranial nerve number 1, which would correspond to the first word in this saying, the first word starts with an S, therefore cranial nerve number 1, which is the olfactory nerve, is going to be a sensory nerve. It's going to carry sensory information only. But let's take a look at the very first B word. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that is the 5th cranial nerve. And if I think back to my mnemonic, O, to touch, Then cranial nerve number 5 is our trigeminal nerve. So our trigeminal nerve is cranial nerve number 5, and the 5th word in our saying here starts with a B, so it's going to carry both sensory and motor information. I have a little video that will help you to remember the cranial nerve functions that we'll watch in class. So if a cranial nerve has been injured, the patient will usually present with some kind of deficit. And so we'll look at that with an application activity in class. So now let's take a look at some of our spinal nerves. As I said, we've got 31. Here is the breakdown for all of those nerves. They're going to be involved in both motor and sensory transmission of information, and they are also going to be involved with reflex control, which is what we studied in the last unit with the central nervous system. So they're going to be involved with two-way communication with the brain, since they're carrying both motor and sensory information. And so this is a cross-section of our spinal cord, which we studied in our last unit. The dorsal portion, the dorsal roots, are going to carry sensory information, which I've colored yellow. So that's going to include our dorsal root ganglion, which actually consists of cell bodies of afferent neurons, and then they're going to extend through the dorsal root and enter the dorsal aspect of our spinal cord, again carrying sensory information. And then after our central nervous system receives this information, it'll perform integration. It will create some kind of command for our body to follow, and that command is going to follow the descending tracks and leave our central nervous system through the ventral root. And so that's what I have here in blue. The dorsal roots and the ventral roots are going to come together in order to form the spinal nerve, which I colored green because yellow and blue make green. And so since our spinal nerve is a mixed nerve, it's carrying both sensory and motor information. That's why I've colored it green in this picture. So remember that sensory information is going to enter into the dorsal area of our spinal cord. It's going to travel to the brain through ascending tracks. The sensory nerve cell bodies, however, are found outside of the central nervous system in the dorsal root ganglion. The nerve cell bodies of our motor neurons, however, are going to be found in the anterior horn of our spinal cord, and they're going to carry motor information that traveled from the brain down the descending tracks to our motor neurons, the cell bodies once again being in the anterior horn, and then those cell bodies are going to extend to axons that exit our central nervous system through the ventral roots, and then exit to the body through the mixed spinal nerve. So our spinal nerves are going to form nerve plexuses. Nerve plexuses are going to be formed by the ventral rami of spinal nerves. But before we get there, I just wanted to mention that intercostal nerves are going to serve the muscles and the skin that are found in the thoracic area of the body, both on the anterior aspect and on the lateral aspect of the trunk. And T1 through T12, remember, those are designations for the different vertebrae. It's in between those vertebrae that these nerves, these intercostal nerves, are going to exit the CNS. They're going to sprout off of the spinal cord and then innervate the muscles and the nerves at their particular levels. But these are not formed by nerve plexuses. These are just sprouting off of the spinal cord in the thoracic region. But as I said, our spinal nerves are going to form nerve plexuses. See, once the spinal nerves are formed by the merging of the dorsal and the ventral roots, they're going to split again in order to form dorsal and ventral rami. The singular term for rami is ramus. And plexuses are formed by the ventral rami of the spinal nerve. So the branch of the spinal nerve that swings out to the front of the body, they are the ones that are going to form these nerve plexuses. Nerve plexuses are networks of nerves, and they are going to serve the motor and the sensory needs of our limbs. And we have 4 major plexuses in the body: cervical, brachial, lumbar, and sacral. And even though, there are multiple nerves that are going to be a part of the cervical plexus, and multiple nerves form the brachial plexus. I'm not asking you to know them all. There's really just 2 that I would like you to know. One is in the cervical nerve plexus. The other one is in the sacral. In the cervical nerve plexus, the major nerve there is called the Phrenic Nerve, and that is going to branch off of the cervical plexus, which you can see in the picture all the way up at the top, and then that's going to reach down and innervate the diaphragm, and even the areas of the shoulders. So the Phrenic Nerve is going to help us with breathing. So it's a very important nerve, and we will be talking about that later on. So I wanted you to know it. The brachial nerve plexus, again, you can see in dark pink in our picture here, is going to branch off and serve the upper limbs. Basically the arms, upper arms, the lower arms, the forearms, and the hands and fingers. Our lumbar plexus, again shown sprouting off of the lumbar area of the spine, is going to serve the abdomen, hip, thigh, and a little bit of the leg. But most of the leg is actually served by nerves of the sacral plexus, mainly the sciatic nerve. Now, we talked a little bit about the sciatic nerve when we talked about the structure of the pelvic bones. And remember that in the pelvic bone, we have a notch called the sciatic notch, where you can see here in our picture, the sciatic notch is allowing this very large nerve to emerge. That is the sciatic nerve. And the sciatic nerve, by the way, is the largest nerve in the body. And so if that gets pinched, a lot of pain and discomfort is going to be experienced by the patient. And that pain and discomfort is going to be exhibited largely in the gluteal area and or the buttocks, and then also down the thigh and into the lower leg. The sciatic nerve is the main nerve that serves the anterior aspect of the tibial and the fibular areas of the leg. And so those are the nerve plexuses. Now you might be wondering, well, okay, if those are the ventral rami that are forming these, what do the dorsal rami do? Well, the dorsal rami are going to innervate the muscles of the back and the skin that lies superficial to it. Okay, so we've talked about the peripheral nervous system. The afferent system portion of this peripheral nervous system is pretty straightforward. It's just going to connect different receptors to the central nervous system. And remember that the nerve cell bodies of the afferent neurons are found in the dorsal root ganglion. It is the efferent branch of the peripheral nervous system, however, that gets a little bit more complex. We have the somatic branch, which means that motor information is going to be sent to the skeletal muscles of the body. And then we have the autonomic portion of the efferent peripheral nervous system, and this is the part that is going to innervate muscles, smooth muscles of different organs of our blood vessels, and then also different glands within the body. And our autonomic nervous system is further branched to form the sympathetic system or branch, and then the parasympathetic branch. So this is the area that we're going to talk about next. Okay, so the afferent and the efferent branches of the peripheral nervous system is what we're talking about on this slide. So basically, In the afferent branch, action potentials are traveling from sensory organs, from different receptors, even special organs, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, into the CNS. And as I said, the dorsal root ganglion are the location of the afferent nerve cell bodies. The efferent system is going to carry motor information to our effectors, and we have two branches, somatic and autonomic. And in this picture, since our effector is skeletal muscle, this would be a picture of an efferent neuron of the somatic nervous system. So in the somatic nervous system, we have one neuron that connects our CNS with our muscles. Just one neuron. So let that sink in. One neuron is going to connect our brain and our spinal cord with the skeletal muscles of the body. And we're talking here, then, since we're talking about skeletal muscles, we're talking about the body, the things that we are able to control actively with our brains. In the autonomic nervous system, however, our motor information doesn't travel down just one neuron, it travels down two sets of neurons. The first neuron stretches from our spinal cord, which is where the motor neuron cell body is found in the anterior horn of the gray matter, and that's going to stretch to a ganglion somewhere within the body. We call this neuron that stretches from the CNS to the ganglion our preganglionic neuron. The postganglionic neuron is going to have its nerve cell body in the ganglion, and then it's going to stretch to the effector. So where the somatic branch is going to control voluntary activities, our autonomic branch is going to control automatic activities, and things like digestion, sexual function, and stress response, things that we don't necessarily have active control over. Okay, so in this picture then, I'm showing I'm trying to show you the difference between the structure of the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Our somatic nervous system has one neuron. Here you can see that its nerve cell body is found in the anterior horn of the spinal cord, and it stretches out through our ventral root into our mixed spinal nerve, and then it stretches all the way out to our skeletal muscle, our effector. And that's very different from the autonomic motor neurons. Here we have our preganglionic neuron with its nerve cell body, again in the gray matter of the spinal cord. It exits the spinal cord, and it is going to terminate in a ganglion somewhere in the body. Our second neuron has its nerve cell body in the ganglion, and it extends out to our effector, which can be smooth muscle, it can be glandular cells, or it could be cardiac muscle, which again, cardiac muscle is striped just like the skeletal muscle, but this is found only in the heart. So let's talk about the autonomic nervous system. As I said, it requires two neurons in order to deliver motor information to an effector. We have autonomic ganglia all over our body. Neurons that have their cell bodies in the CNS. So these are motor neurons that have their nerve cell bodies in the anterior horn of the spinal cord. These are called the postganglionic neurons. Neurons with their cell bodies in the ganglia, the ones that have cell bodies in the CNS are called preganglionic neurons. Excuse me, I made a mistake there. And the ones that have cell bodies in the postganglionic neurons are in the ganglia are called postganglionic neurons. The preganglionic neurons are going to synapse with postganglionic neurons, in the ganglia that are found all over the body. So look at this picture here. Nerve cell body in the CNS terminates in the ganglia. That's the preganglionic neuron. Nerve cell body in the ganglion and terminates at the organ. That's the postganglionic neuron. I apologize for my slip up there. So, in our autonomic nervous system, our preganglionic neuron is myelinated, which means that the impulses are going to travel very quickly from the CNS to the ganglion, but our postganglionic neuron is not myelinated. And that's a really big question as to why not. And there are two reasons that are given for that. The first one is that using body resources to myelinate the postganglionic neuron would be a little bit wasteful, because the distance between the ganglion and the organ is typically very, very short. And so you're talking about a difference in milliseconds for the impulse to travel and to reach its actual effector. And so maybe that time is just not worth the amount of effort and energy it takes in order to create myelin on all of those different fibers. But the other issue really lies with the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic postganglionic fibers are typically longer than the parasympathetic postganglionic fibers, and the theory is that because the sympathetic nervous system postganglionic fibers branch a lot in order to stimulate many organs at the same time. If they were myelinated, that would happen too quickly and mistakes could be made more easily at a time when you don't want mistakes to happen. And so that is another way of thinking as to why those postganglionic fibers are not myelinated. So as you can see, I've got a link here to an article. It's kind of dull. It's not a very good visual, but I will post that in our module so that you can read that on your own. Okay, so let's take a look closer at our sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. Our sympathetic branch is our react to stress, so it's responsible for the fight or flight response. By contrast, the parasympathetic division is responsible for rest to digest. So where our sympathetic nervous system kind of ramps up our body, gets it ready to face a threat, to face a stressor, our parasympathetic system is going to help us to wind down and to relax and to kind of come down off of that, quote, high that we experience in response to stress. So the organs of our body are innervated by both sympathetic nerve fibers and also parasympathetic nerve fibers. And so how does it know how to respond when it gets stimulated? Well, it all has to do with the neurotransmitter that is released, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But when we are facing a stressor, we want to either fight or run away. And so regardless of which one we want to do, we need to be able to see. And so our sympathetic nervous system, as you can see on the right side of this diagram, is going to cause our pupils to dilate so that light can enter. It's going to inhibit the flow of saliva because we have saliva in order to digest things, and we don't need to be eating and digesting when we are in a state of stress. It's going to help to accelerate our heartbeat and dilate our bronchi, which is going to help our heart to push blood through our body very, very quickly so that our organs that need it have the oxygen and the nutrients that they need in order to keep us alive, in order to help us to survive. And of course, by dilating our bronchi, we're able to get more oxygen into our blood. Our sympathetic nervous system will inhibit all forms of digestion. So it's going to inhibit the stomach, the duodenum of our small intestine, the pancreas. It's going to inhibit peristalsis. And again, it kind of goes along with saliva. We don't need to be digesting our food right now. It's also going to stimulate the conversion of glycogen to glucose. Glycogen is a molecule that serves as long-term storage of glucose in our liver. And so our sympathetic nervous system is going to stimulate the liver to break down glycogen and to get glucose into our blood so that our cells can use it to create ATP so that we can perform in order to fight or flight against that stressor that we're looking at. It's going to cause the secretion of adrenaline and noradrenaline. Again, these are in response to stress. The picture that you see there is the adrenal gland, which sits on top of our kidneys. And it's also going to inhibit bladder contraction so that our bladder isn't squeezing and forcing urine out. And so those are all the different things that our sympathetic nervous system is going to do. The parasympathetic nervous system is going to cause the opposite things to happen. So again, parasympathetic nervous system is all about rest to digest. It's going to wind us down, help us to relax. So digestion is going to start up again. It will stimulate our stomach, pancreas, the duodenum to again break down any food that was being stored in our stomach. Stimulates the release of bile from the liver, which is going to emulsify and break down fats for energy. It's going to slow down our heartbeat, constrict our bronchi in our lungs. We don't need to have that much oxygen anymore. It's going to stimulate the flow of saliva again in order to allow us to digest any food that we're eating. And then it's also going to allow for the bladder to contract so that you can urinate and empty that bladder. Okay, so in this diagram, we have a comparison of our parasympathetic neurons and then our sympathetic neurons. Remember, both of them are going to have two neurons. The preganglionic neurons have their cell bodies in the CNS, and our postganglionic neurons are going to have their cell bodies in the ganglion all over the body. So let's first talk about our parasympathetic nervous system. Our parasympathetic nervous system have long preganglionic neurons, because they are going to stretch from the CNS to the ganglia, which are very close to the effector organs, sometimes on or in the effector organs too, which means that the postganglionic neurons are very, very short. This is going to allow for very specific, targeted control of the effector organs. In our sympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic neurons are going to terminate very close to the CNS. The ganglia are very close to the spinal cord, and that's what you can see here. Notice the difference in length in the blue preganglionic nerve that is representing the parasympathetic nervous system, and our sympathetic is in red. So it's showing us the length there, how short the preganglionic neuron is. Our ganglia for the sympathetic nervous system are very close to the CNS, and our postganglionic neuron is going to extend a long way to its effector organ. That's going to allow for more branching to happen so that when we are faced with a threat, bam, we can initiate our changes that I just went over on the previous slide all at the same time. Digestion's going to stop, our pupils dilate, our heart rate increases, our bronchi are going to dilate, our bladder is not going to be stimulated. We want all of that to happen at the same time. We don't want our pupils to dilate and then a few beats later have our heart rate go up. No, we want that all to happen together so that we can face that stressor most effectively. But with the parasympathetic one, we don't want to just everything to just like stop and just jolt the body. We want our bodies to have time to kind of wind down. And so that's going to happen more slowly because the postganglionic neurons of the parasympathetic division are very, very short. And that's going to allow for very targeted control of our organs. And so once again, how do we know, how do our organs know how to respond if they are stimulated by both the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division? Well, it's all about the neurotransmitters. So all the sympathetic nervous division and the parasympathetic division, the preganglionic neurons all release acetylcholine. So the neurons that originate in the central nervous system, they release acetylcholine in the ganglia. And I'll talk a little bit more about this adrenal medulla in just a second. But the difference then is in our postganglionic neuron. In the sympathetic division, the postganglionic neuron releases a different neurotransmitter from the preganglionic neuron. It releases norepinephrine. Whereas our postganglionic neuron in the parasympathetic division releases acetylcholine. So when norepinephrine binds to the smooth muscle or the glands or the cardiac muscle, they are going to react to a stress. They're going to react in a way that allows our bodies to react to stress. If they bind with acetylcholine, they are going to ratchet down. They are going to rest to digest. So the neurotransmitter is basically telling the organs what to do. Let's take a look at this middle box though, because here we don't have a ganglion. We actually have our presynaptic neuron stimulating a gland. And again, this is the adrenal medulla. This is the middle portion of the adrenal gland, which sits on top of our kidneys. And when the adrenal medulla is stimulated by acetylcholine, it is going to release epinephrine and norepinephrine, not as neurotransmitters, but as hormones into the bloodstream. And then those hormones are going to circulate throughout the body in the blood, and they are going to bind to effectors that actually have receptors that are specific to epinephrine and norepinephrine. You're probably like, well, what's the difference? Like, why isn't it all just released by neurons? Well, this is explaining why it takes us so long to kind of come down from that high from a stressful situation, because as hormones in our bloodstream, epinephrine and norepinephrine are going to have more prolonged effects. They're going to stay in there a little bit longer. As neurotransmitters in the synaptic clefts, they're going to be recycled very quickly. And so in this way, that stress response kind of keeps us, even after the stressor is removed, we still feel that, almost like excitement, that high, because we still have these hormones circulating throughout our bloodstream. And so it takes us a little bit longer to come down from that, to calm down from that. The last thing on this picture, even though we're not talking about the somatic nervous system, I just wanted to mention that, again, the somatic nervous system is going to have a single motor neuron extending from the CNS to the skeletal muscle, which is the effector of the somatic nervous system. And it is acetylcholine that stimulates the contractions of skeletal muscle. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to go ahead and pause this slide and see if you can't, from memory, tell me what the sympathetic action would be on all of these different effectors. And then tell me what the parasympathetic action would be on these effectors. And so here's our story. So you're walking on a mountain trail and you see a bear in the woods. What is your sympathetic branch going to do to these effectors? And then once the bear leaves, what is the parasympathetic action going to be? So go ahead and pause the video and see if you just can't list. And do write them down. Go ahead and physically write them down and see if you can't get them right. Okay, so hopefully you've paused the video and you've written down some answers. Here are the correct responses. All right, anatomy students, I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you learned a lot, and we'll talk more about the autonomic nervous system in class. Thanks for watching.